Hey everyone, and welcome to Prune Belly Insiders. This is such a joyful day, always a glad day when we can talk to either a girlfriend, fiance, or wife of a survivor. Everybody, please welcome Maggie Mason.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. So, how did you guys meet?
So Dan and I met a little bit over 5 years ago, actually through Facebook dating app. Um, I was married before, so I got out of a marriage and I was so out of like the dating scene. So I just figured why not? And it was funny, like he reached out to me and I'm like, I don't know about this. So it actually took a while for us to get together. The first time he's so like we were talking back and forth and he actually came to like my town to like the bar there and he's like come meet me here and I'm like absolutely not. So I totally stood him up the first time but he did not give up.
Was that a good sign or a bad sign?
It was a good sign. He was like respectfully not giving up, but it was funny. He thought it was a good idea to just show up and be like come meet me here and I'm like no.
You don't know who you can trust nowadays.
Exactly. And I'm like, I don't know you. Like he was from Wisconsin. I lived in Illinois. I'm like, you came way too far just to be like, come meet me here.
Right, and it's even more ironic that was on, you said, Facebook dating app.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard of anyone actually getting together through that app.
Yeah, let me tell you.
So, when did you go on your first date with him?
So probably we talked for maybe 3 weeks and then he tried to meet and I stood him up. And then I think like the week after, I actually went up to like his family farm, which now, like in hindsight, I'm like that was probably the worst decision ever. They lived off like this crazy farm, like it was like I think 13 acres total off of like a back road in Wisconsin. And I ended up meeting him at like 7 o'clock at night. So it was dark. I'm like, this, if I wasn't going to get killed at a bar, I was going to get killed at here. So,
So wait, he had a lot of farm life. I remember him saying that in his interview. How you deal with that? Do you like the farm, or are you
so
more city girl, I should say?
I actually grew up in the city. I was definitely a city girl. Like we had neighbors on both sides of us always and whatnot. But after we met and like spending time out at his family's farm and this and that, then I was like, I kind of like this life. So when we ended up buying our house, we have just a little bit under 2 acres. So like we have neighbors by us. Like if the world was ending, I have somebody close by, but it's not like so close where they can see like through our windows. So definitely
Right.
the best of both worlds here.
That sounds good. So, what, when did you start having feelings for Dan?
Um, I think it was kind of right away. I know you've talked to him before. He's definitely like a smooth talker. So
Right.
he was definitely easy to talk to and he
His
was
whole family is.
yeah, no, definitely. He's one of those people like I'm very antisocial. I don't do well in like large gatherings and with people and stuff. So like he's the complete opposite of me. Which was nice because like even talking to like people online, most like men will respond and say 2 words or 3 word answers. Like he was actually holding a conversation. So I'm like, oh, okay, like I could get used to this.
Huh, that's interesting. You're serious? Just two three-word answers?
Oh my goodness. Like online dating is the worst thing ever. I would never recommend it to anyone. But yeah, like talking to people online, it's like, hey, how was your day? And like you get back good. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're done talking because I'm not going to
Right,
carry the whole conversation.
right. Fun. That's like I talk to my parents.
Yep, I have a 13-year-old too. That's what I get.
So, so how long did it take for Dan to get feelings for you?
I don't know. honestly, it was pretty quick. So we actually met in like March of 2020. So like right as the whole world shut down for COVID.
Right.
So we laughed that like our relationship was on like overdrive because we didn't have anywhere to go or anything to do. Everything was shut down. So like we either spent time between like his place or my place. And so we had nothing else. So like we were together every day. Since we met, it was honestly like 5 out of 7 days at least that we saw each other. So we do laugh that like our relationship was like on overdrive. Most people nowadays like see each other like on the weekends or whatnot. We spent like every moment together.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, it was
Especially when you can find
definitely,
someone you can connect with that much.
yeah, it was definitely different. I don't think that if that would happen now, like where we are today, that that would ever like work out that way. But thanks to
Right.
COVID and the world shutting down,
To kind of normalize us again.
yep, definitely.
Well, I guess we'll figure out over the next 4 years. So, uh, what would you say is special about your relationship with Dan?
Um, I think we are very much opposites. He is like the social, chatty Cathy, and I'm the antisocial, quiet. It takes a lot for me to talk to people. But like he's the messy one, and I'm the one that likes things in their place and organized. And so we're very much like yin and yang. We're definitely opposites of each other.
And what would you say is the difference between dating, say, a well, quote unquote, healthy person versus a prune belly patient? If there are any differences.
I don't know if there's a ton of differences. I think he tends to live his life to the fullest. So, and I'm kind of impulsive, which kind of makes that like a scary situation because we're like, hey, like, let's go on vacation to Vegas and like we're booking tickets tomorrow type of thing. So, um, but honestly, I think the biggest difference is that with like all of his doctor's appointments and whatnot, he's very much a go with the flow. If his doctor says jump, he jumps type of thing. And I'm the one that likes to ask the questions. I'm like, why are we doing this? What's the benefit of this? What's the cons of this? Like, what are side effects and this and that? So, like, we even
Figure
laugh
that
at
would be the opposite.
it. Yeah, no. Even at his doctor's appointments, people are like, are you in the medical field? I'm like, nope, I've just researched this to death and I know the questions to ask. And so I kind of become like his, I would say probably his greatest advocate at this point, where like if somebody says something, I'm like, I don't think that's right because so
All right, so I have to ask you something because this has happened to me before, and I'm sure it's happened to other prune belly patients and parents and caregivers. Does it get you mad when a doctor will come in the room and say he knows more than you, then you say the word prune belly, then he goes out and Googles it in the hallway?
oh, absolutely. Even like some of his specialists, like it was funny because just recently we've been going through some like rejection stuff. And
Right.
so he's like, so we're going to do this and this and that, and it's going to reverse it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, actually, his rejection's chronic and they're scarring. Like that can't be reversed. And he's like, well, that's not what I meant. I'm like, that's what you said. Like, it's sad that I know it can't be reversed. I'm hoping you know it can't be reversed too. So
Right.
yeah, definitely. Like that, honestly, as much as I'm not an outspoken person, that's probably where I become the most outspoken when people are missaying something and I'm like, nope, you are wrong.
Honestly, I wish I was more outspoken as a teenager. That may have changed a lot. But going off of that, when did Dan ask you to marry him?
So it was actually pretty quick. We were only dating, I would say about a year when we got engaged. It was funny because like his life was kind of changing a lot. So we met in March and then like November of that year, his parents were moving from Wisconsin to Florida. And so his options were either stay in Wisconsin and find his own place or find somewhere to go or move down to Florida. And if you know anything about him, he is all about snowmobiles and snow and cold, and Wisconsin and Florida is not the place where he wants to be. So honestly, we met in March. We bought a house in December, And then we ended up being engaged right around that same time. Like we were engaged before we bought our house. And then we didn't get married until just last year, like so last October. So we've been married just over a year now.
Right. How did he ask you? Like, how'd that go? What was the situation?
So I laugh with him all the time now. I'm like, you are so unromantic. So on his family's farm, he had like what they call a shop. So he likes small engine stuff, and him and his dad used to work on fixing things, and they like they worked on old like Model T cars, and they worked on snowmobiles, lawnmowers, and whatnot. So he invited me over one night, and in the shop, he got down on one knee and proposed. And I'm like, this means a lot to you. I'm like, to some people, this is very unromantic, but that was definitely his way of doing things.
Welcoming you into the family.
Yeah, 100%. I'm like, this is a great story to tell our kids.
So you just had a child, right? Congratulations on that, by the way.
Thank you.
Now there's a rumor going around that prune belly patients can't have kids. So how were you guys able to break that stereotype?
So that was actually one of the topics that came up right away when we first started talking. That's so like when we first met, I did not know he had prune belly. We were chit-chatting and whatnot, and then it's funny because he's also missing a part of his finger that's not related to prune belly at all. He had like an accident when he was younger. And so when we were talking, first he broke that news to me. He's like, "Hey, I'm missing like half of my finger. Are you okay with that?" And I'm like, I don't care. It's your finger. Like, and then, so then we were talking probably for like a week later, and he's like, so then I have to tell you, like, I have this like rare disease and condition and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, like, what else are you going to tell me? Like, is this it? Like, how many more bombs are you going to drop? And so that was one of those things that we talked about. He's like, yeah, they said I can't have kids. And kids were very important to me. So I had my son from my first marriage, and I had him super young. I was 21, so like he's 13 now. And I just wasn't done having kids. I knew I always wanted to have at least one more, if not more than that. So that was definitely one of those moments where we're like, is this going to work? Like, are we going to be happy? Like, if we can't have kids, are we going to adopt? Are we going to do something and whatnot? Um, but I'm definitely stubborn. And so when we started talking about this, like seriously, I'm like, how do you know you can't have kids? And he's like, well, I was told that since I was little. And I'm like, okay, but why? And so he's like, I don't know. They just said I can't. So that's when I pushed to the topic and whatnot. And we actually went to a reproductive urologist and did the testing and whatnot. And he's like, well, you can't have kids the natural way, but nobody says you can't have kids. So it was definitely like a long process. And it was very touch and go because we didn't know for the longest time if he really could have kids naturally, like together, our own children. So it was definitely touch and go. But as soon as we figured out that it was okay on his side, then like our odds went way up. So
And so you're saying there would have been low odds had that went the opposite way around
um between like if
if he couldn't have the kids.
if he couldn't have the kids, I think we would still probably be together. We would adopt and whatnot. But I guess it's different to have biologically your children.
Right,
So like that was important to me as well as to him.
right. Yeah, that's understandable too. I'm just
Yeah.
curious about that. So, how does the IVF work exactly?
So it was honestly, it's a super long process. This we started probably in 22 and we just had our daughter this January. So like 3-year process. Um, he actually went through all the testing, so he doesn't naturally ejaculate. So there's never going to be a possibility where like we'll naturally have a child. They thought for the longest time that he might have retrograde ejaculation, which means that it would just go into his bladder. And they thought that if that was the case, then things would have been a lot easier because then you ejaculate, you pee, they take out the sperm, and then you can go through the process. But we tried those testing, and even that didn't work out. So, like, they couldn't find any sperm in his urine. So we actually went through and did a surgical procedure where they actually went in and removed the sperm. And so it was funny because it's like two procedures in one. If if you do produce sperm and it does travel, like they can take it out of one area, but if you can't, then they have to take it out of a different area. So like during the surgery, like the doctor came in, he's like, we didn't find it in the first spot. And so like I was all distraught. Like, really, like I really thought we had a chance and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, but we're not done yet. Like, I just want to keep giving you updates. And so then he did come back afterwards and he's like, we actually found a ton of sperm. So like we have, I think, 3 or 4 vials total we had to work with and stuff, which was great. Well, like everybody says, it only takes one, but that's like if everything is perfect under the perfect circumstances. So getting a few vials was definitely exciting news.
Right. So how's that work though? Like how's the sperm and the seed connect? Like is that through a needle or is that
So he actually had like a surgical procedure and they removed it. And so then I had another procedure where they went in and I was on medication where, because normally the female releases one egg each cycle.
right?
So what they did is they put me on medication to release multiple eggs. And then they went in and it's like a needle process. They pulled all of the eggs out. And so the ones that were mature, they would take good sperm to my good eggs and they put them together in a petri dish. And once they developed into an embryo, that's when they froze them.
Wow. And
So
then from there they just put it in you, right?
yeah, so like I believe, I don't know if I know the numbers completely off the top of my head, but I believe like I had 26 eggs removed, 18 were mature, and like 9 fertilized, and then they have to make it to day 3. So I think 8 made it to day 3. And so we had 8 embryos to work with.
All right. And is there more about the relationship you can tell us about?
Um, Honestly, I would say that our relationship is very similar to anybody else's relationship. I think the differences are because of his prune belly, like you never know, like there's a lot of what ifs. So like if somebody gets the common flu, they're sick for 2 or 3 days and great, but like if he gets the flu, he gets dehydrated, he'll get hospitalized, like things like that. So it's definitely a lot of what ifs. Um, where I think that's where we're kind of in that different stage of life. Cause like when like right now, so we just had our baby and it's flu season and RSV and whatnot. And like we've been staying put. And it's one of those things like I have an immunocompromised husband, I have a brand new baby, like no one in this house is getting sick. So we we definitely think things through a lot differently than most people do. Like, we would love to go out, we would love to go shopping and do all the things right now, but I'm like, it's just not a good time. So I think that's where our relationship is a little bit different. It's definitely the you don't know what's going to happen. Like, tomorrow's not promised to anybody, but more so in this instance. So,
So how early on, in your opinion, should a guy tell a girlfriend or significant girlfriend about their prune belly syndrome?
so Dan told me pretty early on. I wouldn't say like right away when we were talking, but at least within the first couple of weeks. And honestly, I think that's important.
Yeah,
I think that it's a lot to take on as a significant other and whatnot. Like it
yeah, I
really is.
totally agree.
It like dictates your whole life. So it's if you're gonna hold it back and not tell somebody, like be prepared to probably have your heart broken when people can't
Right,
handle it. And like that was one of the things he asked. He's like, "Are you okay with this?" And I'm like, "I don't know what this is. I don't know what this changes for us." You know what I mean? Like it's easy for
right.
me to say like, "Yeah, like I'm going to love you no matter what," but like I don't know that that means 12 doctor's appointments in a year and that means hospital stays and emergency rooms and like I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
So if you had to do it over again, would you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, especially with like what I know now. I was very naive at first. Like as soon as he told me, I Googled it and I'm like, what is this? But the more that like I've read research papers and like the more that I learned about this, the more I'm like, okay, like we can totally get through anything. Like I get that you've had two kidney transplants, you might have to have another one, but like it's not like I guess I would say like a death sentence. It's not something where it's like I'm worried that he's going to drop dead on me tomorrow type of thing.
Oh,
Like,
I am so sorry. Can you repeat that one more time? You
no,
said
like
it's not a what?
yeah, it's definitely not like a death sentence. Like he's lived his full life. Like he's probably gonna outlive me, honestly. But it's it's one of those things like you definitely have to advocate for yourself. So we've had plenty of instances where his doctors are like, "Okay, we're doing this," and I'm like, "I don't think that's the right step." Like, so I've definitely pushed back. He's pushed back because then once I give him my side of things, he's like, oh, okay, I definitely agree with you, but you definitely have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I know I've had to push back a lot with doctors.
Yeah. And at first he was like really worried when like his doctor's like, we're going to do this procedure. And I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea. And he's like, well, they're going to think that like I'm like bucking the system and I'm not being cooperative and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, there's a difference between like not following your medications and not being cooperative versus not agreeing to everything they say. Like they think that
Exactly.
they know everything, but they don't know you. They don't know what your end goal is and whatnot. So, I think he's finally to that point where he's okay to advocate for himself.
Yeah. And I think a lot of prune bellies get to that point. Uh, Most of the ones I've seen have gotten to that point very, very young. Like I've heard a lot of times where they'll say prune bellies are wise beyond their years.
Hmm.
And I think this channel just helps it more. That's the point of this channel is to show that you can make it through this. But while you can make it through it, that's why I bring people on to tell the honest stories. Because while you can make it through it, it's important to know the bad that's ahead of you more than it is to know the good, in my
Oh,
opinion.
100%. And like I guess when we talk about it, like he and I have talked about it, he's like they're the doctors, they know. And I'm like medicine is not a science, like it's a practice. Like they are just shooting darts like right now too. Like you don't know for sure. You can't say that this procedure is going to solve everything or this is going to
Yeah,
do this. And
because if you ever ask a doctor what they do, they don't say, "Oh, we prescribe medicine." They say, "We practice medicine."
some not very well. So,
Amen.
um, yeah, definitely. We've definitely gotten to that point where now, like, he's more comfortable to be like, hold on, I'm not okay with this. Like, give me more information and whatnot. But in the beginning, if somebody told him, like, hey, you need to stand on your head and it's going to help, he'd be like, okay.
So, I'm trying to think. Is there anything else with your relationship you'd like to mention?
Um, I don't think so. Like we definitely have a pretty normal relationship other than extra doctor's appointments and having to make like tough decisions between what we're gonna
Ha-
do.
Have you had to go through any of those surgeries with?
So he's had his kidney transplants and most of his surgeries prior to us meeting each other. When we met, he actually had a really horrible back pain. So without having abdominal muscles, like a majority of his weight and everything is held up by his back. And so he
Right.
could barely walk, he could barely move. He wasn't working at the time. And
And just
so
and just to give you some information on that, I know he said he had an abdominoplasty when he was young. When I had my abdominoplasty when I was young, the doctors had told my mom that they took back muscle to try to stretch it to the stomach to give him stomach muscles. And he said that can actually weaken your back muscles and cause pain.
that 100% makes sense. Like with
But
him,
that's
it's
something they didn't tell my mom.
I know.
She found that on her own.
And that's the crazy part. Like, before you make some of these decisions, you should know all of the facts. like how is this going to affect you later on and stuff. And that's definitely what like one of his, he could barely walk when we first met. And I went to doctor's appointments where he had like cortisone injections and whatnot. And like we walked out of there and he's like, I feel no different. Nothing helped. And so it was funny because like I started doing research, and one of the ladies that I work with, her husband is a chiropractor. And so I reached out to her and I'm like, listen, so like, here's my boyfriend. He has this condition. And is this something that your husband would even like consider taking on? Because we've seen plenty of doctors too where they're like, yeah, no, I'm not taking you as a patient. So, and it was funny. So like he's a chiropractor and then he had sons that were going to school to be chiropractors as well. And so she sent me a picture of like one weekend they were like up at like a lake house and like all three of the boys had like medical books out and they're like reading up on prune belly and whatnot. And so that was one of those things like he went to this chiropractor and after like two sessions he could walk normally. He didn't have as much pain as he normally did. Like he could actually function. And we went through at least three or four doctors prior to that that like said, well, this is it, like that you're gonna be in pain. There's nothing we can do. We can help you a little bit, and none of that helped. So
That's where I am, and actually, I'm on hospice for my pain, believe it or not. At first, because I have malabsorption with pain medication, so it does absolutely nothing for me. It doesn't absorb. So the only way I could get any pain medication in is if I wore it like a patch that sunk in through the skin, or
mhm.
if I had an IV in and it went straight through my veins. So for I think it was 3, 4 years, I had a PIC line in on hospice giving me Dilaudid every so often with a button I can hit every 15 minutes for more medication. Even with that, my pain stayed around a 7 or an 8,
Yeah.
but it brought it down to a point where it wasn't affecting my chest. And today I'm off the PIC line because of an infection, and I'm on 250 micrograms of fentanyl per hour.
Wow.
So I'm trying to find a doctor to take it over, and that's been hard.
Yeah. We like he has a transplant clinic like doctor that he sees, and we actually tried to switch doctors because we weren't too thrilled with him. So like we went to different hospitals, and honestly like we live in the Chicagoland area, most of the decent hospitals turned us away and said we won't even take you on as a patient because of everything. And so that's crazy to think about, like that doctors can just turn you away and be like, nope, I'm not even going to deal with you. So
Yeah, that's wrong, and to me, that's against the Hippocratic Oath.
yeah,
But
100%. Like people are like, we have all this medicine and you can see whoever you want to see and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, like they cannot take you. I don't think
yeah,
people realize that.
yeah, I know an election for my state government is coming up in 2 years, and that's probably when I'm going to run to try and change some of that, at least for the state here. But what do you think of the health pro the health educate not education, the health system we have now? How would you describe it? Good, very good, bad, horrible?
Um, I wouldn't say it's horrible, but I definitely would say that you have to advocate for yourself. Like there's good doctors and then there's not so great doctors. So I haven't had like much experience with the medical field before Dan and I were together. The only other like instance that I can think of is when I was younger, my dad had a tumor on his like pituitary gland.
Right?
And so he went to go see a doctor and they're like, okay, we're gonna like crack your skull open. We're gonna go in, remove it. You're probably never gonna work again and blah blah blah. And like it was one of those things like that's gonna change your whole life. Like if he can't work, like what is he gonna do and this and that. So then we actually went out and got a second opinion, and this other doctor's like, absolutely not. Like, we're going to go through your nose, we're going to pull it out in chunks. You'll be out of the hospital the next day. You'll be out for like 6 to 8 weeks. And it's one of those things like, if we went with that first doctor, his life would be completely different right now than getting that second opinion. So it's kind of
Uh,
it's the same thing with this. We had one doctor tell him that this is what we're doing for rejection treatment. And when we pushed back, we actually saw a different one. And he's like, that's not going to help at all. Like, it might prolong your kidney, but I can't even tell if it's going to prolong it for 2 days, 2 months, or 2 years. He's like,
Well,
that
the
I
fact is, it's
wouldn't.
going to prolong it.
Yeah. He's like, and honestly, like, we say it's going to prolong it, but 2 days is prolonging it. So,
Well, I'm saying even if it prolongs it for 2 days, I'd still take it because it's still
true.
prolonging it.
Yeah, but like, that's what we
But
kind of
I
talked
see what you're
about.
saying, though.
You have to go through your pros and cons because it was one of those medications that any infection could turn crazy. And they're like,
Right.
so you can get an infection and you'll die tomorrow, or you'll live with your kidney that's dwindling down and you know you're going to probably need another kidney transplant down the line.
Yeah, I know. I almost died of sepsis about 3 times.
And that's scary. Like, anytime he gets sick, it's very scary to be like, is this going to be an infection and what is it going to do?
Exactly. So, what are some pros and cons of dating a prune belly patient?
Um, I would definitely say some of the pros is that like we just live our life differently. Like we know that tomorrow isn't necessarily promised. So in I guess I would say like in a different relationship, like I'm one of those people that's super cheap. I'm not about spending money and whatnot. And so like I don't think I would go on vacations and I don't think I would go to these concerts or to this or to that. You know what I mean? Like I don't think I would have
Right.
experienced as much as he and I have experienced in the few years that we've been together. Um, the cons are just that it's very like time, and I don't want to say time consuming, but I take off of work a lot to go to doctor's appointments with him and like the research that it takes to go into this and whatnot. Like it definitely takes a large portion of your life. It's not something that like you can think about when you want to. It's something that's on your mind all the time.
And the thing I don't understand, and I know I should be keeping this on your relationship, but in terms of the research, what I don't understand is we have all this research for children with prune belly. Well, why don't you follow those children up to adulthood and see how the adults are doing? No one's doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, or at least I haven't seen a study where they've taken the adult patients personally.
Yeah. And I feel like some things are very much stuck in time. Even through the Prune Belly Network, the Facebook group, I was talking
Right.
to a mom who just had a son, and she's like, my son was like 3 days old, and they told me he's never gonna have kids and blah blah blah. And like that's when we had our daughter, and it was posted everywhere. So she reached out to me, and she's like, how were you able to have kids? They told us we can't have kids. And I'm like, I feel like that's just a very like dated thought
Stereotype.
process. Yeah, like I get it. Maybe 30, 40 years ago, like IVF wasn't to the level it is now and whatnot. Like, yeah, that might have been true then. And like, I'm sure it's true now. I'm sure some people really can't have kids. Like, everybody's different. But like, don't tell somebody that with like a 3 year old, like a 3 day old. Her baby was super little. And that was the first thing that they told her. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, don't give parents like this major blow that you're never going to have grandkids and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's ways. And now this
Yeah.
baby's like 3 days old. In 20 years, when they're ready to have kids, I'm sure technology and everything's going to be even further along. So,
So, what advice would you give somebody who just found out their boyfriend had prune belly and they're deciding whether to go forward with the relationship or not? Not to
um,
make the decision for him, but what advice would you give them?
I would definitely tell them that it's not something that's like going to go away. It's going to take up a good portion of your life, and it's going to change how you do things sometimes. It's going to change how you interact, like where you go, what you do, type of things. But it's also, like I said earlier, like it's not like a death sentence. It's not something that like I don't know. It doesn't have to be horrible. Like, I guess it all depends on how you choose to live your life and how, if you're going to be positive about it or you're going to be negative. The same people can go through the same things and view life differently. And I think if you have good spirits and you have a good outlook, you can definitely live a normal life. Like, he he has a part-time job, like he works around the house, like we have a home, we have kids, we have pets, like we travel, we do things, like I would say we live pretty normal lives.
Right. And would you say faith played any part in this relationship? Like your in God or something like that?
I definitely think that there's a level of faith. Like I can't tell you how many times I've kind of like went to God and I'm like, what do we do now? Like they said that this is horrible. Like where am I going? Like what am I going to do now? Type of thing. Um and I guess my thing is like never just take the first answer that you get. Like you have to do your own research. You have to be your own advocate. You have to push yourself to make sure that you're okay with that decision and whatnot. So I definitely think like we ended up going to church together, and I think religion does play a huge role in it.
Is there anything else you want to say before we end this?
Um Honestly, I just feel like it depends on your outlook on things. Like you can live a totally normal life. Like there's going to be hurdles and there's going to be differences and there's going to be hardships, but it's also great too. Like we've experienced more things probably because of his prune belly and kind of living that more care and I wouldn't say like carefree life, but like that tomorrow's not promised kind of living than we would have in other instances. So I guess I would really make sure you advocate for yourself, make sure you advocate for your loved ones if they're not going to advocate for themselves. And it's a lot to process. I feel like I can't tell you how many times they tell you so many things at once, and it's so much information to process where he's like slowly processing through all of this, and I'm like, I fixate on something, and I'm like, okay, like you deal with your stuff here. I'm going to start researching this, and I'm going to start looking at that. So I definitely think that having like that family support and having people there for you goes a long way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and most importantly, share the video. Let's together hashtag spread Prune Belly Awareness. I want to thank Maggie for coming on, and I'll see everybody next week.